chop it down.
That's included the subtitle.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Chop off
in
the
YouTube.
subtitle.
Yeah, YouTube, you normally you have space for the description, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, so we're live on YouTube. And let's go live on, we've got a couple minutes, but we'll go live on Zoom anyway and just start the kids' art.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so people are starting to pop in. So I am going to spotlight my video as we get started here, as people are coming in, because since this presentation is not about one particular species and it's about a whole bunch of different species, it's harder to focus on owl calls and what they sound like. So we have a special treat. We have from our International Festival of Owls that we do every year, we do a Children's International Owl Art Contest. Ta-da! That's the background here. So kids from all over the world enter. So for instance, this year we had 2,800 entries from 39 different countries, I think. And a few days ago, we spotlighted some of the artwork from the children in Ukraine and Russia, and people really liked seeing that. So we're sorting through all of our old artwork and pulling out all of the artwork from children from Ukraine. And there's a lot of it. So while we kill a little bit of time the first few minutes while people come in, I'll share some of that artwork with you. So this is a 13-year-old. These are all from Ukraine. And I should point out the ones you've been seeing if you've been with us before. This one is from Ukraine. This one is from Ukraine. And the cute little blue owl there in half a coconut shell with the hat and an umbrella next to him, that one is from Ukraine also. And they're younger kids mostly, and very colorful. So this is a 13-year-old. There's a very, very artistic one. It's always so fun to see what the kids come up with. They're way more creative than I am. And obviously an owl with an umbrella with a rug over his branch. Smart, he seems to be reading a book. That's a 7-year-old. Here's a very beautiful and colorful one. You can see there's some shiny paint on that one. Three owls stacked on top of each other with a lot of ladybugs. And some fun little owls with some fun flowers and a little beanie hat. Of course, owls wear beanies. There's a lot going on in this one. This one must not like the cold very much, or at least cold rain. It's got a thermometer there and he looks kind of sad. This owl's got it together. He looks ready to go to work and has a nice warm cup of coffee or tea or something there. There's one done in pencil, very intricate. 10-year-old. These kids put my artwork abilities to shame. There's a fun, colorful one. Another colorful one. So we will put some of these up in a Facebook gallery so we can show a bunch of these, and we're trying to figure out how we can sell some of these online, and then hopefully use the proceeds to benefit the kids in Ukraine. So that's our goal. We just have to work through a bunch of things to figure out how to do this. So that's what we're hoping to do. Ooh, here's a fun one. Check out those legs and the colors. And we'll do two more, and then we'll pop over to what you actually came here for, which is Arnold and Koss. One more. Finish off with an owl and a bow tie. All right, now I need to unspotlight myself. There we go. So, welcome to the final presentation in our virtual owl expert speaker series this winter. And if you haven't joined us before, I'm here from the International Owl Center in Houston, Minnesota, which is way down in the southeast corner of Minnesota in a town of less than 1,000 people. But hey, we can still have an International Owl Center here. If you haven't done these before, please note that we have the chat disabled in Zoom. We may post links in there, so links to some of Arnold and Koss's works you'll be able to find in chat. If you're in YouTube, the chat will be live, and we have some chat room moderators over there to help you with that. Please keep chat on topic, and if you have questions, you can ask those in chat. If you're in Zoom, please ask your questions in the Q&A section, and we will take questions at the end of the presentation. This presentation will be saved on YouTube, so you can view it later. I think there's going to be a lot of information, so you may want to review that or refer other people to come back and watch that. And a big thank you to everybody that's joining us to learn. And I'm happy to be learning here because I know these guys know tons of stuff. And last time I heard Arnold present, I think my head was about ready to explode with new information. So this is fantastic. So thanks to all of you who are joining us, and a special thanks to everybody that gave donations to help support this series so we can keep it free for everybody who's watching. Because it takes a little small army on our end to make it work. So we've got Joe and I will be doing questions here. Joe's doing some stuff in the background right now. Andy, one of our other educators, is at the Owl Center with an in-person audience. And then we have some of our chat room moderators in YouTube handling things over there. So there's a lot of us in the background running around to make this work. And a little bit of background about Arnold and Koss. Arnold Vandenberg is an ecologist specializing in assessing habitat quality from the perspective of the organisms that should be living there. And much of his work focuses on nitrogen deposition in the environment, which is a really significant issue, especially in the Netherlands right now, but not that it isn't elsewhere. Koss Koenrads, hopefully I'm not butchering your names too bad.
No worries.
Is an ecologist who conducts ecological, morphological, and physiological research, and he specializes on those aspects in birds as well as the lifestyles of birds. So together they co-founded the Zoological Museum Netherlands in order to explain how animal characteristics match up with their ecology and how human interference with the environment creates mismatches in relationships that sometimes animals can't overcome. One thing I do want to note before we get started with this presentation, I know many of you are biologists or have been exposed to things like that. If you're not, please be aware there are going to be some images of dead birds in here because that is how they're gathering a lot of this information. So just be aware that that's going to be a part of this presentation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Koss and Arnold.
Thank you. Okay, there we are. Welcome all, thank you for joining. My name is Koss, and I will be doing the presentation, like Carla said, together with Arnold today. And yeah, we made a title of this presentation which states European owls made to hunt. And the way we look at owls is it's quite unique in that way. We use a lot of anatomy to discover how owls are functioning, how their morphology relates to their ecology, and that's what we want to do today as well. And that's also the idea behind the museum, like Carla summarized just a moment ago. So the way we look at owls today is the same way we look at other species, other birds, other mammals, all in relationship with their surroundings, with the areas they live in, with the food they eat, and possible threats and conservation measurements that could be involved in protecting these species. So what we will do today is use the anatomy of owls we look at to show the variation in hunting behaviors and food processing in owls. So we take you step by step through the life of an owl, from hunting to processing its food. And here we summarized, wait 1 second. Yes. We summarized what we are going to discuss today. Well, we consider this as the first chapter in our owl special, and that's about European owls. We would like to cover the world owls, so all the owls in the world, but it's going to be a bit too much to cover at once, and takes a lot of time to do dissections, gather all the information. So the first chapter we do in our owl special is about European owls. Also because they're closer to where we live in the Netherlands, we are a bit more familiar with these species, so it's a bit easier to think like the owls we're looking at. So it's going to be a challenge going to South America, Australia, but it's planned to do that. So in the future, we hope to send those extensions as well. Okay, so about European owls, we're going to explore those owls by the analysis we've done based on the morphological, physiological, and behavioral things we looked at in these owls. And we tried to use these aspects to explain the differences in ecology between these owl species. Do that to dive into the owl behavior that goes from hunting to processing the prey. It takes quite some steps. We do it based on the morphology we looked at, and we try to go beyond the commonly known adaptations known to owls. So there are some adaptations people know about in owls, and we try to get a bit more content to show you how it's how we can get more into those details. And we also want to have a comparative approach and use birds of prey for that reason, to show how owls are different, but also how they are compared to birds of prey from a phylogenetical point of view, because birds of prey and owls are quite related in the bird phylogeny. So by comparing owls with birds of prey, we also have kind of a reference to compare among owls. And last but not least, we try to learn, amaze, and discuss about owls today, because we think you're all enthusiastic about owls. We are too, and we try to give you some new information and new amazement about these nice creatures. To start off, which owls do we consider European? That's an important thing, because we say we will be talking about European owls, but which owls do we include? And we chose two photos to sketch our selection of owl species. The left one, I think for some of you must be familiar, it's a brown fish owl. These are in the outskirts of what you could call Europe. They still occur and breed, but we didn't get our hands on those ones, on any fish owl yet. So it's a species we would like to have included, but we didn't get the chance. So already, if people know of specimens we could use for that measurements and dissections, would be really welcome. But that's basically the only species of Europe that we didn't include. And the right one, it's a photo I borrowed from the Scottish Owl Center from Tristan. It's a pharaoh eagle owl, Bubo esculaphus, and it's actually from Northern Africa and the Middle East. So it's not actually European, but we did include that one because we're interested in the differences, because this one has a really different ecology than other eagle owls or larger owls occurring in Europe. Well, apart from those two, we made a slide with photos of all the owls we included in our analysis. And that's this one. Most of you will be familiar with the species from the photos, but from top left to bottom right, I can quickly go through the names so people are familiar with the species we'll be talking about. From top left, it's a little owl, then a pygmy owl to the right. Scops owl, Ural owl, boreal owl, or Tangmons owl, depending on where you live. Short-eared owl, tawny owl, pharaoh eagle owl, barn owl, and Eurasian eagle owl, and great gray owl, snowy owl, and long-eared owl. Those species we considered European, and that's the ones we got our hands on to get data from. Some photos, this is a comment for the whole presentation. Most photos are of our own or are borrowed by people that allowed us to use them for presentations like this. Some photos are used with permission, and then it's stated at the photo, like here in the bottom. So from the European owl collection, this is photo-wise, but we also really want to thank especially the Scottish Owl Centre and RIAS. The Scottish Owl Centre is a breeding centre in Scotland that also does a lot of owl education, and we got some specimens from them to look at, and that's part of how these analyses we're talking about today could be done. And the same goes for RIAS, which is a rehabilitation center in southern Portugal. They provided us with nice specimens to do the measurements and dissections. So we're really thankful for those organizations, and we hope to use more materials of them in the future. And from other organizations, of course. If people are listening and have anything to offer that we could use, that would be more than welcome. Okay, about the phylogeny of owls. Phylogeny is something we're going to include in the presentation because we want to include birds of prey, and that's why we look into the phylogeny as well, to see how birds of prey and owls are connected. But first, just a really quick phylogenetical note on owls. There's only two families of owls we can distinguish: the typical owls, the Strigidae, and the barn owls, Titoniidae. We'll come to that later on, how that reflects their different morphologies, but we keep it to these families, and for European species concerned, we only have the European barn owl that makes up any information in this presentation. Like I said, the diurnal birds of prey and owls, they are quite related. They share a common ancestor, and that's why we choose birds of prey to select as a reference. And to give you a more visualized view on that, we drew the phylogenetic tree of the avian kingdom and encircled the owls and birds of prey. And if you can see, the birds of prey and owls are quite close to each other. They branch off, owls branch off from the birds of prey. And a branch before that, you can see that gulls, terns, and waders are forming a group. But given the lifestyles and the differences between owls and gulls and waders, for instance, or the other group related, kingfishers, hornbills, and other birds in that group, we chose not to take those as a reference because birds of prey and owls simply have comparable lifestyles to some extent. They are carnivores, they hunt prey. So a relatedness also gives us some insights in how to compare morphological characteristics or how to compare ecological traits of those groups. Just to be clear, we did not include falcons because phylogenetically they cannot be considered actual birds of prey because they evolve from a really different part of the avian world. Although they hunt prey, we do not consider them birds of prey in this talk. Well, which birds of prey do we include? It's only European species, so it goes from basically vultures, harriers, hawks, buzzards, kites, and no falcons, like I stated before. The birds of prey, we use them as an outgroup, like it's called in the phylogenetical description, we'll see, and you'll see in the graphs we present later on that most of the findings we present first in comparison with birds of prey to have an idea if owls are really different from birds of prey or if they show comparable findings, and then we go further into that. So to start, what makes an owl an owl? That's basically a question you could ask yourself. And what makes an owl that different from birds of prey? Well, one of the main typical things that owls have in general is that they are active at night. They hunt their prey in the dark, and birds of prey do not tend to do that. So the question is, how do owls do that? It's a question that's been asked quite some times about owls, but we try to approach it in a different manner than normally is the case. So we try to crawl into the skin of an owl today, and we try to think like an owl from a hunting owl's perspective. So imagine you're an owl and you're flying around, you're sitting around, and you want to fly towards an area, you want to catch your prey. What's necessary in your behavioral aspect? First, you have to detect a potential prey, and because it's dark, most owls do that on hearing. And to detect it, it must fly silently. And it has several reasons, but one of the most important reasons is that if you don't fly silently, it's hard to hear your prey. We'll come to that later on, but flying silently is something owls are known for and is an important aspect of owls. And you can see that in their morphology as well. So we'll start looking at the flight of owls and how it's becoming silent compared to other birds. Here we show you 4 photos of different owl species, and as many of you will know probably, owls have barbs on the leading edges of their wings. So the edge of their wings has small, really small hair-like curved barbs. And what these barbs actually do is dividing the drag that goes, the wind drag that flows over the wing, divide that into very small particles of drag. So by dividing it into very small particles, the net drag is reduced significantly. Because it's reduced, it doesn't get that much sound together with the drag forming at the leading edge of the wings. So these barbs are an indication of how owl wings are adapted to flying silently. And what you can see is that if you look at the relevance, which you can ask yourself, compared to the ecology of different species, are there any differences in these, in the development of these barbs on the wings? Here on the left side, in the little owl, Tenenoctua and pygmy owl, Tokidium pastorinum, those barbs are hardly developed at all, if you look at the leading edge. And on the right two pictures, which is long-eared owl and barn owl, they're quite well developed. And this also goes together with ecology and the type of hunting these species have. This is a general look at it, because it's also phylogenetically bound, of course, that some species are related to each other, so might have more developed barbs than they need for their hunting behavior. But here you can clearly see that species that hunt at dusk and dawn or in daylight and don't need to be that silent, because, for instance, they hunt on eyesight more, they show less developed barbs than the ones hunting in the dark upon hearing. And that's also something you can see outside as well, like little owls, you can see them being diurnally active. And barn owls in general, apart from some populations in the UK, they tend to hunt in the dark, so they need to fly silently. But the barbs are one of the commonly known owl characteristics. What's more in the silent flight characteristics that might be important for owls to fly silently? And one of them is the wing loading. And the wing loading can be explained as the amount of body mass that has to be carried by the wing surface. So how large are the wings compared to the mass of the body of the bird? And the wing loading, if the wing loading is low, it gives the bird the ability to use less flapping, and less flapping means less noise, and flying slower also means less noise. So a lower wing loading results in making less noise in your flight. It also reduces the drag, because you don't fly that fast. But it has one demand for the bird: to keep it low if your mass doesn't change, and that means you have to develop big wings, because, like we said in the first sentence, the amount of body mass and the wing surface are the aspects that are depend, or that make the wing loading high or low. So the body mass doesn't change that easily, so your wing surface tells something about how low or how high your wing loading is. So big wings, that's something owls would need to keep the wing loading low. And you can think of a swift in comparison, which has a high wing loading. And then the question you might ask is, why does a swift have a high wing loading? Because it might be easier to have a low wing loading, because you make less noise or it takes less effort. But a swift is a bird that has to hunt at speed. It has to hunt insects, it has to be highly flexible. So the high wing loading in swifts is also something they use. And if you have a high wing loading, you have to fly faster. For a swift, that's the kind of technique it uses to hunt. And for owls, they don't fly that quickly because they rely on their senses. So for owls, it's not that necessary to fly quickly, and that's why they can have a slower flight, which goes together with a lower wing loading. Well, wing loading can also change. Like this picture, I think many people know it. It has been spread on the internet a few years ago. This is an owl that catches a cat and takes it up into the air. So you can imagine, if this is the added mass to the body mass of the owl, the wing loading gets quite high, even for an owl, but still it's able to get it into the air. If you want to do this, you need power to do so. We'll come to that later, but be aware of the wing loading. It can change depending on the condition of the bird, for instance. But let's have a look at the wing loading compared to birds of prey. what we did, and this is the way we will look at different aspects during this presentation, we compared owls to birds of prey in the same graph first to have an idea of owls being that different of birds of prey, or do they show quite some similarity for some aspects. On the x-axis, we show you the body mass, and on the y-axis, we show you the wing loading. So the amount of body mass grams carried by the wing surface in square centimeters. And what you can see from the graph is that owls don't seem to have that much lower wing loading than birds of prey. These dots are quite in the same spread. So the difference is that for owls, the low wing loading facilitates a silent flight. They need the low wing loading to fly silently. Birds of prey don't, but they show the same wing loading. So, or at least comparable wing loading. So what would be a reason for birds of prey to have low wing loadings as well? Well, for instance, for soaring birds of prey, it could be really relevant to have a low wing loading because you can fly for hours effortlessly using thermal currents in the wind streams. It means you don't fly fast, but it takes you hardly any effort to do your flying. So especially in soaring birds of prey, you see low wing loadings. Another reason for birds of prey to have
and
low
here
wing
in the
loading,
graph, perhaps, Cas, you have to explain that because the big vultures are to the right side of the graph, and they have quite a high wing loading in this picture. But you have to look at the relationship between the size of the bird and its wing loading. And then you get some kind of average line through that dot of clouds. And compared to that line, the big birds of prey have a quite low wing loading. So perhaps you can indicate it with your arrow.
Yeah, do you see it like this? If I do, you mean that this is the line you would expect?
Yes.
Basically, based on the spread of dots, and then the ones gathered here, those are the ones you would expect to be vultures because they are on the high end of the body mass scale, x-axis, and they have a relatively low wing loading compared to the other birds of prey, which are on a much lower body mass on the x-axis. So this means indeed that the larger birds of prey, among which much of them are vultures, concentrated there, they have a relatively low wing loading compared to other birds of prey. And then, of course, the question is why? Why would vultures have a low wing loading compared to other birds of prey? Well, they don't have to hunt. They don't have to actively hunt other prey. And they do want to soar effortlessly because vultures can take days to find a carcass or other pieces of food. So they can use their energy, and that's why they're not adapted to that much of an active flight. Now we're looking at birds of prey and owls, but to give you an indication of how low the wing loading actually is in these two groups, we want to compare it to a duck as well. And I think most people know ducks in flight. They make a high whistling sound. They fly at really high speed. And that's because ducks have to fly fast to stay in the air. They're quite heavy compared to the surface of their wings. So it takes quite some power to motorize the wings to stay in the air. And it results in a fast flight. And for a prey animal, that's a nice thing to have. So if we place the duck in the graph, you see it's really high compared to the birds of prey and the owls. Even for the higher birds of prey, the duck ends high in the graph. So for wing loading, it seems comparable between owls and birds of prey. we saw in the duck that the muscles motorize the wing, and that the muscles are the motors that keep the wing flapping in case it's necessary. So if the wing loading between owls and birds of prey seems comparable, can we also say that the flight muscles between those two groups look similar? And that's something we are going to look into now. But first, we want to explain for the people that are not familiar with it, what we're actually looking at. The flight muscles are one of the biggest muscles found in the avian body. But to have an idea of what we're comparing, I think it's nice to go into the basic anatomy of how these flight muscles attach to the avian body, basically. So here we look at a schematic view of a cross-section of a bird from the back to the belly, basically. And the large flight muscles are located here, the pectoralis muscle, and they attach to the sternum, the breastbone. And the breastbone has a keel pointing down when the bird's in flight, and it creates a large surface on which the muscles can attach to. The small flight muscle indicated here, the supracoracoid muscle, that's the one for the upstroke, also connects to the sternum, but then on the inside, close to the body. The pectoral muscle, the large flight muscle, is the one responsible for the downstroke. So looking at these muscles can tell us something about what kind of flight and what kind of power the bird can use in its during its flight. How does this look in real birds or during a dissection? That's this in comparison. We show it to you in a barn owl here, and you see the white line. 1 second. The white line here where the arrow points to, that's the keel of the sternum to which the flight muscles attach. So here we have a ventral view. We look at it from the downside. And the keel of the sternum is enabling the muscles to attach to. So the surface of that keel is important for how many muscles can attach. And that's what we can see here as well. 1 second. But one problem of looking at these muscles is that they can vary with condition. If a bird is really skinny, it can have really small flight muscles. And if it's in really good condition, it can have really large flight muscles. So here in the right bottom corner, you see 2 eagle owl flight muscle close-ups. And the left one is of a really skinny individual, and the right one of a individual in really good condition. So flight muscles are hard to base draw conclusions upon when we're comparing, for instance, the power that the muscles can deliver between different owl species. So how can we compare those owl species in a better way? Well, we did that based on the surface of the keel of the breastbone, because these flight muscles attach to the breastbone, and much of them attach to the keel. We use the keel to look at. So here we have the breastbone and the keel highlighted in yellow. And why we look at the keel is because the muscles attached to the keel, no, let's put it like this. Where the muscles attach to the keel, there the muscle contracts on that in that direction. So it's a good idea of the cross-section of the muscle that delivers the power for the wings. Of course, the muscles cover more of the breastbone, but the part of the muscle attached to the keel, that's an indication of the power of the muscle. And it doesn't vary with condition, because if we look at a bony part, that stays the same within the individual, while the muscle mass can change with condition. We use the sternum keel surface as kind of a proxy for the flight muscle size to compare within owls and birds of prey. And that delivers us this graph with on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, the size of the bird, and on the y-axis, the vertical axis, the keel surface standardized to size. And by standardizing the keel surface to size and showing that plotted against the size in this graph, we can look at the differences between the dots in the graph and compare them, because size is not a factor anymore in the position of these points in the graph. So this means we can compare within the group of owls or between owls and birds of prey, standardized for size. We can draw, or we can see how these relationships are present. Well, overall, you can see that the owls, the orange dots, have relatively smaller keel surfaces than birds of prey. And what you can especially see is that within birds of prey, the green triangles, there's much more variance within the group of birds of prey. Owls seem to have like a horizontal, almost horizontal line here, while birds of prey have a much larger range over the graph. And this means that the variation among birds of prey is much larger than amongst that of owls, based on this graph. So the wing loading we stated a few slides ago is comparable, but in the muscles, it seems that there's much more differences between birds of prey and owls. So then the question arises, why is there such a difference in birds of prey breastbone keel surfaces and therefore muscle size? Well, we discussed it a bit a few slides ago when we were talking about the vultures already. Some birds of prey, they really have to accelerate or speed up to chase their prey. Think of a sparrowhawk hunting a sparrow in the garden. It has to be hunting at high speed in order to keep up with the prey and catch the prey. Whereas a vulture, it doesn't need to speed up. It has to fly around for a longer time, and it doesn't need that acceleration that much. And for owls, it's basically the same thing. Owls, they depend on their senses actually, and they don't speed up that much as a sparrowhawk to actually catch their prey. And because they have low wing loading, they need a slow flight. That's what goes together with a low wing loading. So you see that owls have less muscle mass relatively compared to much birds of prey. Like I said, vultures don't need that acceleration, and the vultures are positioned here, also on the high end of the size axis, but they have a muscle, they have a keel surface comparable to the owl line, if you think that through to this end. But then still within the orange dots, there's quite some variation among owls, and that's what we can dive into now. And to do that, we made a new graph that relates keel surface standardized to size. So again, the size effect is taken out, and compare that to wing loading. Because what we would expect is that the variation in the flight muscles has a positive relationship with the variation in wing loading. If the wing loading increases, we would expect to have a higher keel surface. And that means if the wing loading increases, it also needs more muscles to be able to fly, because it needs a more active flight. Well, the trend line shows you the average relationship in within the owls. So that's the line drawn in this graph. And what you can see here, we will point it out in a second, is that sit and wait hunting owls remain close to the line. Species like little owl or tawny owl, depicted here, they seem to follow the relationship we would expect. But there are also dots within these owl data that go far below or far above the line. Well, the species are mentioned in the right, but we took out some examples to make a comparison. And generally stated, we could say that above the line, the flight muscles are relatively large based on the surface of the sternum keel. And below the line, the flight muscles are relatively small based on the surface keel of the sternum surface. So let's look at some of these species or groups. And that's to start with a really interesting one. We see short-eared owl way above the line and long-eared owl below the line. And the interesting thing is that these species are in the same genus. So it already shows that within the same genus, there can be quite some variation on this aspect, for instance, the amount of flight muscles. And on the other end, in the section of large owls, we see the same thing with snowy owl and eagle owl. Snowy owl is the phylogenetics position of that species is discussed for a long time now, I think. Some people say it's a bubo, some people think it has its own genus, but relying on the current status of it being a bubo, it still shows that morphologically, a snowy owl is different from an eagle owl, being way up on the line and eagle owls being below the line. The ecological reasons for this variance are aspects to think about and to explain why these relationships within the genus or between genera or within owl groups are present. So large flight muscles relative to wing load, those are the ones above the line. They seem related to more active hunting behavior. Like a short-eared owl, they hunt on grassy fields at high speed, and snowy owls, they hunt on open plains and in daylight as well, and they seem to have a more, the amount of muscle they have seem to relate to a more active hunting behavior. Whereas a long-eared owl or eagle owl are a bit more into the sit and wait predators, which means they need less active flying, they need less muscles to do so. So they have a different way of flying related to how they hunt. And like I said, the differences between genera can be smaller than within one genus, like is shown in ASIO for the long and short-eared owl, and within bubo for the snowy and eagle owl. So this gives a whole new approach of looking at owls. If you take out the phylogenetical way of how owls are arranged, if you look at it from an ecological view on, for instance, this aspect, the amount of flight muscles and wing loading, some species that are not related at all within the world of owls show the same morphology. And similarities in morphology, there are the result of ecological relevances, which are often regardless of the relatedness or unrelatedness in the phylogeny. So this means if owls are not related in phylogeny, they can really be similar to each other, or if owls are really related phylogeny-wise, they can be completely different morphology-wise. And on the horizontal axis, we draw an arrow as well to show that an eagle owl can be more comparable to a little owl if you follow the line than to its brother in the bubo, the snowy owl. So it's not per se that the phylogenetical relatedness of these species is leading in the morphology. Well, there's one dot in this graph that raised questions for us, and that's the Bubo ascalaphus, the pharaoh eagle owl, which is located here at the blue spot, and it's quite low below the line. It does meet the bubos here, the orange dots, but in the ecology of the pharaoh eagle owl, we would expect it to be above the line. And we see during the dissections that the eagle owls, the bubos, they have clearly different keel shapes. And it made us realize that looking at these keel shapes gives way more information, or gives more information than just the surface. The shape of the keel, which makes sense, also determines how much muscle can attach. So here on the top left, we see the sternum keel with the muscles removed of a pharaoh eagle owl on the left and Eurasian eagle owl on the right. And you can tell from the shape already that the surface of the keel is different in those two species. So on the pharaoh eagle owl, the ascalaphus, more muscles can attach to the keel compared to the Eurasian eagle owl. But it's hard to grab that in numbers, actually. So the length and the height, like we calculated the surface of the keel, are important, but also the shape of the keel. And ecological relevance for the pharaoh eagle owl, for instance, is that it's living in a really different environment than Eurasian eagle owl. And it might be very opportunistic in catching prey. So for instance, it should be able to catch larger prey when it comes across large prey, because the amount of prey in the desert is probably not as high as in the regular hunting grounds of a Eurasian eagle owl. So that means if you have to catch a larger prey, you need larger muscles to take it along, or you need to fly longer distances to find your prey. And these are ecological explanations of why pharaoh eagle owls have larger breast muscles, higher sternum keels, and also another shape of the sternum keel. And this means that the proxy we use is for the muscles is generally suitable, but still there are some detailed differences between species. Then we talked about wing loading and muscles, but we saw there's quite some variance among owls in those two factors. But also within wing loading, you can have different shapes of wings with the same wing loading. Imagine you have a wing of 2 meters long and half a meter wide. It can have the same wing loading as a wing of 1 meter long and 1 meter wide, because the surface is the same and the body mass stays the same, but the shape of the wing differs quite a lot. And we can see that in live owls as well. For instance, the wing shape of a short-eared owl, it's very different from the one of a eagle owl or a pygmy owl. And this holds close to the flying types of these species and the habitats they live in, the prey they hunt upon. So that's another aspect to look at, the aspect ratio, and that basically means how slim is the wing of the bird. So how long is it compared to the width of the wing? And we give an indication of that by dividing the wing width by the wing length. Here are examples from other parts of the avian world. For instance, sandwich tern, which has really slender wings. Hummingbirds, which have really different wing shapes, long and slender. A stork in the bottom left, really wide wings and long as well, so large surfaces. And bottom right, for instance, frigate bird, which has really narrow, long, pointy wings. And these are all related to the type of flight these birds use. And generally, slimmer wings have a more efficient flight because they have less wind drag in flight. You can imagine the surface along which the wind drags is smaller when the wing is not that broad. And on the wing tips, the drag that's created there is generally smaller in slender wings as well. So in general, a more slim wing reduces drag compared to a broad wing. But if you have long wings, because they are slim, it requires a stronger skeleton and a heavier wing bone. And long wings are not always suitable for the habitat you live in. So for instance, if you live in a dense forest, it's really, it can be a problem really to have long wings, because navigating through dense vegetation will be problematic. So generally, the birds that live in the open areas seem to have longer wings as well. But how is this among owls? Can we see patterns in this? We made the same kind of graph first. Let me see. Let me think. On the y-axis, we put wing width divided by wing length. So basically, the aspect ratio on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, the wing length. So again, we divide the y-axis basically by the x-axis, which means the points we see in the graph can be looked at without having an effective size. And the trend line drawn through these dots indicates what the average relationship between these two is. And this says that, based on the line, that in a longer wing length, the aspect ratio seems to be a bit smaller. So if we compare that to some species as examples, you can state that above the line, the aspect ratio is relatively low. So the species above the line have a relatively broad wing. And we can see that in tawny owl and great gray owl, which makes sense given the habitat they live in and they hunt in. And below the line, the aspect ratio is relatively high. So the wings are quite slender. We see that in ASIO, for instance, long-eared and short-eared owl, but also in the larger owls like bubo and snowy owl. And it's nice to see that based on this aspect, snowy owl and Eurasian eagle owl are showing up quite close to each other in the graph, whereas in the previous graph, they were far away. They were having a large distance. One was on the one end, one was on the other end. So based on the aspect you're looking at, the distribution of the species and the relatedness of the species can change based on the morphology. So generally speaking, the owls hunting in relatively open areas seem to be below the line, and owls hunting in semi-open and denser areas seem to be above the line. Of course, this also has a phylogenetical aspect in it as well, because if you're deriving from a species that has short and broad wings, the chances of having short and broad wings as well is higher than when your related species has very slim wing. So of course there's a phylogenetical aspect, but we do see that groups among owls can be differentiated here. Well, that's for the flight of owls. And then we can go back to the crawling into the owl. We looked at how it can fly around silently, But then the next section is about how it detects its prey. And we talked about it a bit already, that most of them do it on hearing, but we want to go into detail about that. So first of all, why do most owls hunt upon hearing in the first place? That's a question you could ask yourself. Well, simply in the dark, eyes would not be sufficient enough to detect prey, especially on a large distance. So you need another sense of detecting your prey, and that's hearing. Before we go into the owl hearing, we want to talk about a bit of basis in hearing first, and we also state that more an owl hunts upon hearing, we expect it to have more specialized and adapted ears to do so. And one of the best examples for that is the great gray owl, which actually hunts prey without seeing them because they are happily running around below the snow cover without noticing there's an owl maybe jumping on top of them any second. So for great gray owls, hearing must be needed. They cannot even see the prey in daylight, which proves that the owls must be, the ears must be specialized and adapted to do so. And also for a great gray owl, this situation, you could consider it as being pitch dark, as they cannot see the prey at all. And you could also say that owls hunting in the pitch dark at night can use the same behavior to catch their prey only on hearing. So to start with, why do owls and humans have two ears? That's an important factor to understand how hearing works. Well, imagine in this case a short-eared owl.
Hey, Gus, you have to speed up a little bit, I think.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. Let's say a short-eared owl here is sitting on a post watching a prey, and it gives sound cues to the owl. Then the owl needs two ears to determine the origin of the sound, because the sound enters one ear earlier than the other ear, and that's why it knows, the sound is coming from the left, so that's the direction I have to look at to detect the prey. So basically, when the owl turns its head and the sound reaches the two ears at the same moment, it knows it's looking in the right direction. This is the same thing in humans. The left and right ear together make it possible to detect where the origin of the sound is based in a horizontal plane, because turning the head to the left and right makes the owl and human detect on the horizontal axis where to look at and where to find the prey. So that's the same as in humans. Like I said, by turning the head, it can detect where the sound is coming from. And here we made a drawing to show you how it works. In this case, the rodent is located left front of the owl, and the sound will enter the left ear earlier than the right one. So the owl can turn its head so that the sounds reach both ears at the same time, and then it knows I'm looking in the right direction for the prey in the horizontal plane. But owls have asymmetrical placed ears, or at least most of the owls. And why do they do that? Why do they have that? Here's an extreme example in boreal owl or Tengmalm's owl, where the ear openings in the skull are really asymmetrical, the right one being much higher than the left one. And we can have a look at why this is beneficial for owls hunting. So what's the purpose of this asymmetry? Well, again, a short-eared owl sitting on a post with the potential prey below it. And it's exactly the same actually as in the horizontal plane. The sound cues of the prey enter the, in this case, left ear earlier than the right ear. So by turning the head again until the sounds reach the ears and at the same time, the owl can have an idea of where the sound is coming from in a vertical direction due to this ear height difference. So the asymmetrical ears provide an extra axis in a vertical way to determine the origin of the sound. And that's why, that's how owls can estimate their angle of approach to their prey, because they know at what angle they have to fly towards their prey, because they have an extra axis to determine the sound origin. Well, that's about the asymmetry, but there's a bit more hearing adaptations in the owl's head. We talked about the asymmetrical ears. Just a detail, the asymmetry can be based in the skull, so in the bony part. It can also be in the skin or in the shape of the ear. But two other factors in the ear that are highly specialized in owls is, for instance, the skin flap, which cancels direct noise from entering the ear opening, and the facial disc, which consists of specialized feathers that either filter or reflect the sounds coming into the ear. Well, the skin flap and facial disc are quite closely related in how they function. And you can see very large variations among owls between those adaptations. So here's a selection of species where you can see the facial disc in most species develop very well. And for instance, in the snowy owl, you see lack of adaptations. Actually, the owl ear is large, but it doesn't have any skin flaps or that specialized facial discs. But let's have a look at how these interact. The first question is, why would you block any sound when you have your hearing adapted, very specialized upon hunting on hearing? So you have a really specialized hearing apparatus. Why are you blocking sounds? Because that's what the skin flap and the facial disc partially does. Well, the skin flap filters direct sounds entering the ear, and that makes sure that all the surrounding direct noises are not coming into the ear of the owl directly, so it can kind of focus on the high-pitched prey sounds. And the specialized feathers in the facial disc kind of do the same. The feathers behind the ear are dense and smooth of structure, and they reflect the sounds towards the ear, whereas the feathers in front of the ear opening, they have an open structure, and they actually filter away the direct noises. So here's depicted in the picture the reflective feathers on the back and the filtering feathers on the front of the ear. So basically, low-pitched sounds are filtered out and high-pitched sounds are reflected better towards the ear. And that goes together with low-pitched sounds, which are from the surroundings, noise, traffic at this time. And the high-pitched sounds, which the owl wants to hear, are mostly sounds that are made by possible prey. So this results in hearing prey cues better and hearing less noise from wind of surroundings, which is also helpful when you're hunting in flight, because then the wind going across your ears would not be really beneficial to hear all the time if you want to select out some prey cues. Well, some data about the ear opening size of owls and bird of prey compared again. On the y-axis, the ear opening, and on the x-axis, the size of the bird. You can see directly here the gray triangles are birds of prey, that owls are generally having much larger ear openings, which makes sense because they to hunt upon hearing much more than birds of prey. So that's what we can conclude directly. So even when owls don't have very specialized ear adaptations, they still have relatively larger ear openings than birds of prey. But still, there's a lot of variation among owls. If you look at the y-axis, how much variance there is between the owls in the top of the graph and in the lower part of the graph, it's quite a big difference. If we look at some examples of species, here's, for instance, a boreal owl or Tangmond owl. It's a species that hunts in strict nocturnal conditions, which really has to rely on its hearing. It has a relatively large ear opening, whereas large ears also occur in species hunting in diurnal conditions, like short-eared owl. And this is coming back to the remark I made of the great gray owl photo earlier. A short-eared owl hunting in a dense grassland can consider its habitat as a dark field as well, because the prey are invisible within these vegetated areas. So it will need adapted hearing as well to be able to detect it. Besides the time of day, the invisibility of prey also relates to the ear specializations present. In the photo of a short-eared owl hunting that kind of fields at high speed, trying to detect a mouse within this vegetation requires highly specialized ears. So the species placed high compared to other owls have large ear openings, but they also have morphological specialized ears, which means they have skin flaps or the facial discs well developed. Whereas species without those special ear adaptations, they are placed lower in the graph. And this concerns more the diurnally active owl species like snowy owl or pygmy owl that hunt in a bit more light conditions and upon eyesight more than upon hearing per se. And one surprising point in the graph was barn owl, which is relatively low, but we think this is due to the phylogenetic background of the species or the group, and it has a really different ear structure, and the ear opening measurement is not completely comparable to the other owls we processed. So we think this is not completely comparable with other owls, and therefore ends up low in the graph, because the ears are still highly specialized, and it can also be seen in the hunting behavior of barn owls, because in pitch dark conditions they can hunt owls, they can hunt mice purely on hearing, which indicates that they do have a highly specialized hearing apparatus. So what we can conclude based on the variation among owls is that most specialized ears are found in species that hunt visibly hard to detect prey. Are specialized ears only found in birds of and owls, or also in birds of prey? Well, they're not common in birds of prey, but we do see that some comparable adaptations are found in birds of prey. For instance, in hen harriers, which have a skin flap behind the ear, which we think helps them to hunt upon hearing in grasslands as well. Because at the speed they hunt over grasslands, we think they must use their hearing as well to detect prey and catch mice there. It's not as specialized, but it does seem to have some morphological adaptations compared to other birds of prey. And here's the extreme example of long-eared owl, which is highly specialized compared to the hen harrier. And hearing is apparently so important for most owls that you would expect that there's an interaction with eyesight, and that's especially because the head cannot hold that much, cannot provide that much space to put everything in the owl's head. Basically, it would have the head would grow so big to do that it would give other trouble. So give you a schematic view on what could be the problem in owls, we depicted a eagle owl skull from the top, and with the green and brownish structures here, we depicted a schematic version of the facial disc around the head and the skin flaps around the ears. And if we put the eyes into this skull, like it would be the case in a raptor, for example, a bird of prey, you can see that the angle of these eyes would be restricted for a part by the skin flap, because the skin flap is directly behind the eye and would block vision for quite some part. And therefore, in owls, it could be the reason that the eyes have turned towards the front, like depicted in this image, which means that the part of the view that's blocked by the hearing adaptations in the back of the head is restricted, and the owl gets a more binocular view, so it has a better view of its front instead of losing view on the back. And this is really different from birds of prey. And the difference there is that birds of prey don't have that specialized hearing adaptations. So we wondered, how is this in birds that do hunt at night, but do not hunt upon hearing, and also have a wide beak, like in owls. So we compared it to a frog mouth, which is like a really large nightjar-ish bird with a really wide mouth, catching insects at night, having really large eyes as well. We compared the skull shapes to that of an eagle owl. And here you can see that especially the back of the skull is really wide, whereas in the frog mouth, it's not that wide. And the position of the eyes in the frog mouth is quite comparable to what you see in birds of prey. The angle of the eyes goes to the sides laterally, whereas in owls, the eyes point forward much more. So when you don't hunt upon hearing, it seems that the eye's position seems the same as in birds of prey. Well, the second question then is, are owl eyes that large? Because they hunt at night, and they need to have large eyes to catch enough light to see anything of their environment. We compared it to birds of prey again, and put the eye diameter on the y-axis and the size of the bird on the x-axis. And this actually indicates that owl and birds of prey eyes are quite similar in size. It's not that owls have much larger eyes than birds of prey, apparently. But the reason for having large eyes between these groups is quite different. For owls, it's really necessary to catch all the light you can to operate in the darkness for most species. So those eyes are large just to have a large surface catching light. And for birds of prey, they have large eyes to increase their sharpness of vision, because the surface of the eye increases, the amount of pixels basically in the eye are enlarged as well. So the resolution increases. And that's really nice if you have to spot prey at a high distance in the air. It's nice to have a high resolution, because you can simply see more detail on a large distance. And actually, owls even lose resolution because they have a different adaptation in their retinas, in the part of the eye where the image is formed. And that's really different from birds of prey. But it allows them to be able to see in the strict dark. So normally the situation is that the yellow rods in the eye here on the retina, they send a signal to the brain when enough light hits the rod. In owls, these rods are connected by horizontal cells, the purple ones here. And because they are bundled, only 1 or 2 signals on compared to, let's say, 6 or 7 in birds of prey, only 2 signals go to the brain, but the sensitivity of sending a signal to the brain is higher. This means that with less light, owls can see something, they can form an image, but the quality of the image is lower compared to birds of prey. And this means that bundling the rods costs resolution. So owls can see in the dark, but they lose resolution in that. And in birds of prey, every individual rod transfers a signal to the brain, keeping the resolution higher. Then the signals transferred to the brain also have to be processed in the brain. And looking at that organ in both owls and birds of prey, we see quite some differences as well. For example, in a tawny owl, the red circles here show the dictum opticum, which is the center where the optic signals are processed, and they're really small compared to the large, big organs here in a goshawk, for instance. So the signal input, because the rods are bundled in owls, is much smaller compared to every rod sending a signal to the brain in birds of prey. And you can see that in the processing centers as well. Now, what's really special in owls, and it's hard for us to imagine that, but a part of the hearing nerve that goes to the brain is branching off to the optical center as well. And some studies have been done on this. We don't know the exact detail of it, but it what this should mean is that the part of the audio information that owls get through their hearing, which is processed in the brain, is processed in the visual center. And that would mean that owls can get a visual image, basically, of what they hear. And we found it really hard to show you how it must be like for an owl, because it's impossible
Because
for
we
us
don't
humans.
know.
We don't know, and for humans it's impossible to kind of think of how it should work. But we tried to give you an idea of how it could be looking for an owl. So here's an environment in a forested area an owl could look at. And on the right is the dark scene, how it could look for an owl. And it could be that if it hears something moving there, that, for instance, a red dot lights up in that environment based on the audio cues. So it means that the owl could have a visual indication of where the audio cues come from, which would be, yeah, really, really cool. If that would work like that in owls, it would be really cool. But I think we're never going to find out, as we cannot crawl into the owl. At least based on the morphological characteristics, this is a possibility. Then, if you have your eyes at front, you have to look around as well, because if you change the direction of your head, you can change the way you're looking at, or the direction you're looking at, and it has to turn its head. There's a lot of stories going around that owls can turn their heads much larger distances than other birds or animals can. But actually, to rotate the head, the neck vertebra turn as well, and it allows the same rotation in the last 2 vertebrae as in humans. So the axis, the vertebra in the end of the neck, close to the head, that allows the turning. It allows the same rotation as in humans. So owls don't turn their necks much further than we could. But like in all birds, the whole neck vertebrae turn as well, and the amount of neck vertebrae is much higher in birds generally than in humans. So by twisting the whole neck, the owl can turn its head looking over its own back. And why do we think owls turn their head much further? It's because this is a cross-section of a barn owl neck, and it shows that so many feathers surround the neck vertebra that when an owl turns its head, you don't see the neck moving because it's obscured by a thick layer of neck feathers. And that's why people tend to think that owls turn their heads much further than humans or other birds. But actually, it's the feathers that mask the turning of the neck. If you would look at a heron turning its head, it would do the same, but then you can see the neck turning, and it wouldn't be that much of a specialized thing. So that's a myth in owls that simply isn't true. Well, from a hunting owl perspective again, it has been flying around silently. We looked at that. It's detected its prey. It's flying to the prey. And then the next step is grabbing the prey.
Yeah, and perhaps I can take it from here. And I will try to speed it up a little bit. Otherwise, there will be no time for discussion.
Yes,
so
please do so.
First, we look at the length of the legs of an owl. And the femora do not give that much difference. And you see also when you compare the owls with birds of prey that they are quite the same. So there's not much different in an owl compared to a bird of prey. And Cas, you do the actions.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you look at the tarsus length again on the x-axis, and then we look only at the shin bone length, then it seems as if there are two different groups of birds of prey and owls. So there's still not a difference between the both groups, but within the owls, you have species with long shin bones and ones with comparatively shorter shin bones. And of course, we ask why. And because the total length is quite the same, we expect that the shin bone length is more related to the muscle mass that can attach to the shin bone. And we see that in other birds as well, that the muscles are really important. So if we could have some species here in the graph.
Yeah, yes. Then we go into the variation among owls, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Then you see the species which can catch larger prey also have the longer shin bones, have longer and stronger legs muscle-wise. But that's not only species that can catch large prey, but we see that also in the typically northern owls that stay there during winter and catch prey also under the snow. Perhaps they use their stronger shin bone muscles to punch through a layer of snow, because otherwise they may not be able to catch any food. And of course, it's still a hypothesis, but it is really striking that these are the four species with really longer shin bones and the stronger legs, where gray owls and Euro owls do not catch that large prey. Another aspect of grabbing a prey in owls, that is that they have one toe that can turn. So it can be placed at front and it can placed back towards the back. And we measure that only in a subset of owl species, so not in all the owls that we are presenting today. And we have positioned on the y-axis the angle at which it can turn. And you see a nice group of owls that can make quite a large angle. And the eagle owls that we measured it in fall more or less within the birds of prey. So they do not have that toe that can turn that much. But there are also some birds of prey that can really turn their toes. And perhaps we can show that. Yeah, there we are with the big picture. That's the osprey. There's also a turnable toe to catch fish and to have a proper grip on the fish. Now, so we discussed the leg, we discussed a little bit the turning toe, and now we end up with the nails. And if you look at nail sizes, they are comparable between birds of prey and owls. But here on the y-axis, we looked at the amount of variation there is within one leg of one individual in the size of the nails. And then you see that in birds of prey, some nails are really big and some other nails are really small, which gives you a wide variety of nail sizes within 1 foot. And that is because some nails are particularly used to grab the prey or to kill the prey. And also probably because they have this spread of talents to make sure that they catch the prey. You don't see this difference in nail morphology as much as you see that in birds of prey.
Yes.
So finally, the prey is being caught, and now it has to process that particular prey. So one thing that is commonly known about owls is that a lot of species, they ingest their prey whole. And therefore you need a wide beak. And if you compare birds of prey to owls, you see indeed, again in this graph, that they have a relatively wide beak. And another group with very wide beaks are the nightjars. And you see that also in this graph. Why do they have wide beaks? And if you look at well, these are more or less open skulls, and you can also see the brain. On the right-hand side is the nightjar, and the left-hand side is a tawny owl. And you see that the width of the skull in the nightjar is determined really by the width of the beak. So it has a beak that's optimized to catch prey in full flight. So to maximize the chance of actually catching the prey, they have a really, really big, large, gaping mouth. In the tawny owl, that's not the case. We see here that the width of the skull is made up completely by the eyes. So that is a completely different layout. You also see that in both species that the brain did not evolve as quickly as the rest of the skull. So there's an additional skull mass which is filled up by sponge bone. So we discussed earlier that turning the eyes in owls may have been due to make room for this specialization in hearing. And the same is that if the owl's eyes are turned, that may be causing a wider skull, and that may cause also a wider beak. So perhaps the ability to ingest a prey whole is related in an evolutionary way to having this specialized hearing tool. If you have a large prey and you ingest it whole, that may not fit typically in a crop. So it may go directly towards the stomach. So perhaps that is a reason for owls not to have a crop in an evolutionary sense again. Now here we look at stomach sizes, and both axes are log axis, so it is a little bit brought together. Otherwise, it would be a huge cloud of dots. And you see that given the size and given the body mass of an owl, it has a relatively larger stomach than a bird of prey, but not for the larger owl species. So you see a shift that the smaller species have relatively large stomachs, and the larger species, which also very often dissect parts of the prey, like in eagle owls, they have a stomach size which is comparable to birds of prey. Well, owls are carnivores, and they have typical, relatively short intestine length that are typical for carnivores. And you see a whole spread of dots with very long intestines in birds of prey, and these are predominantly fish eaters. We do not exactly know why fish eaters have that much longer intestines than meat eaters. And also the vultures have quite large intestines. But in owls, this seems to be quite reduced and short, as you would expect.
Yes.
Yeah. But at the end of the intestine, owls have a particular structure, which is commonly found in other bird species, especially if they digest, they eat hard to digest prey items, but they have two functional blind guts or ceca. And birds of prey do not have them, or as you see on the right-hand side with the arrows, very tiny, well, bits sticking out from the intestine, and they're not really functional as blind sacs. Now, what do the blind sacs do? In owls, they recycle uric waste, uric acid. So that is produced on the top right side in the kidney, that is transported into cloaca, and it goes then into the stream, back into the rectum. The uric acid is put into the blind guts, and bacteria actually can use the nitrogen from the uric acid to grow and to use that for protein synthesis. And the owl puts in proteases, which are enzyme cutting enzymes, and they can harvest the amino acids that the bacteria produce. And they can have quite rare amino acids from this source, but they can also burn up these amino acids and use them for fuel. So they have a kind of internal waste unit for reuse, and birds of prey do not have that at all. We did look at the variation in the size of the blind guts, and you would expect that if you are close to where you could live, so if you're far up north, for example, or in low productivity habitat, you have relatively large blind guts, or if you need particular amino acids for egg production, you can also need it. But you can see in this little graph that the variation within a species is really large compared to the variation among species. And that is because as intestine length is, it's probably also dependent on the condition of the bird and which species it is and where in the reproductive cycle that particular bird is. So we need a lot of more data from that. So now we have done all the different steps to catch and to process prey in owls. So we can start hunting again. And we skip the summary.
Yes.
But we do want to say some words about what all this means in terms of conservation. Because if there are conservation issues, many people do not appreciate the differences between species. And they think that if I do something which is good for one species, it will also be good for the other one. But that is not true per se, because of the morphology, the physiology, the behavior of these owls can differ in such a way that it is related to different ecological requirements and also ecological measures to maintain or restore populations of these owls. And for example, there is a clear difference for long-eared owl and short-eared owls in their flight capabilities that relates long-eared owls to sites with a much better habitat quality in terms of predictiveness of prey availability compared to short-eared owls, which could benefit much more from instating nature reserves, for example. And we see the same. No, we go on to the next slide. For example, in little owls, they also do not have that much of a strong flight performance. They are not that much adapted to hearing. So they need to catch the majority of their prey at dawn and dusk. They use their eyesight a lot. They need small habitats of sufficient quality. And you cannot expand bad quality habitats thinking that you can save little owls. And then, Cas, I give it to you.
Yes, this was the European version, but like we discussed in the start, we would like to expand our data set. And the next step is which is the next bullet point, the World Owl Conference in the USA next year, in which we aim to dissect and incorporate all the American owl species in our data set and also incorporate them live at the conference after doing dissections live. So we can have this kind of data analysis on US species, but also outside the US or already for the US, we would like to ask all people that could do contributions to that to please save owl or non-owl carcasses, which could be interesting for us to look at. So if you have any specimens that we could look at a university or at an organization in freezers which are available, we would like to use them. And the European Owl Special discussed here, it will be launched on our museum as well on the website, which includes new and extended features as well, amongst UV fluorescence is one of them. And we discussed it quickly in the beginning. Zoological Museum Netherlands is the initiative we use to tell the stories about species and morphologies and conservation issues, etc., to a wide public. And that website is zoologicalmuseum.nl. And we just want to give you a small insight in how the website works. We divided the world into 8 biomes, shown in the right bottom here. And each biome is telling the story of challenges and opportunities of living in that biome using 6 animal species occurring in that biome. And by telling the story of that species, we want to tell what, for instance, the morphological adaptations are of those animals to live in that kind of environment, but also to include potential threats or conservation issues related to living in that environment. And this can have very different and extending examples. Let me see, oh, sorry. Our goals with the website, but also with the project on the sides, is to amaze a wide audience, so also non-scientific related people, to educate people and to create awareness for nature conservation and to integrate fields of research and to develop an integrated understanding of how animals function and interact with their surroundings. And then everything comes together, the morphology, the ecology, the habitat quality. We want to make an integrated view on animals this way. If you want to have more information about what we are doing, about launching the Owl Special, etc., you can follow us on the website zoologicalmuseum.nl or on social media at zoologicalmuseum.nl. Thank you for listening and watching, and this was our talk, and we hope to receive your questions if there are any.
Okay, fantastic. Can we stop the screen sharing?
Yeah,
and then we can see everybody big.
Yes.
There we go. Excellent. Joe, are you ready to start in with a question, or do you want me to start?
Could large flight muscles be related to migration?
Yes, they could. That's the short answer. Yes, of course, it depends. If species migrate, they would need better adapted wings to do so and flight muscles to do so. So I would expect to see a pattern in migration as well. Although hunting year-round requires a certain morphology in wing shape, rest muscles, flight muscles, and all aspects related to that. So yes, migration is definitely an important factor, but we didn't include it in our data analysis because we focused on hunting in this aspect.
Yeah, but if you are migrating and you have therefore larger muscles, that you can also during hunting have a more powered flight. So it goes together, and we do not know, and we do not want to predict what was driving exactly that evolutionary development. Was it migration or was it hunting? One could have enabled the other, and we cannot discriminate between the two.
I have to listen and read questions at the same time. Complicated. An early question that came in, why do some owls get muscle diseases, like they can't move their head or wings properly?
I don't know. That's the short answer. Well, to be honest, we look at dead owls and living owls, but we don't have the vet kind of approach on owls. So to be honest, we're not into the actual diseases that could occur in owls or what goes together with that. So,
but I never heard of it. In European owls, I never heard of it.
In European owls, no. Yeah, no, me neither. But I wouldn't know.
Know if owls can see in color.
What I understand from that is that they can, but not in all the colors that we can see. So that is restricted.
Yes, and I do know a small connection to the UV fluorescence is that they do expand their spectrum with seeing UV, at least for most of the species, like many birds do. So they can see UV and we cannot, but like Arnold says, as far as I know, they also have some parts of the spectrum they cannot see, which we can.
Yeah, but they probably will see those colors in gray, so in the relative darkness of the color, but not the color itself.
Yes.
Do larger owl species, when they're owlets and learning to fly, do they take longer to learn how to fly than smaller owls because of their wing size and load?
No, I guess not. I guess no. Yeah, I'm thinking at the same time. No, I wouldn't say that's the case because the morphology of the owl allows it to fly in a certain way, and I guess that the chicks also grow that morphology comparable to the parents. So if a larger owl with a lower, higher wing loading and high and low and larger flight muscles has to do its first flight, it also has the adaptations to do so compared to an owl that has a different flight time.
Yeah, so it's a little bit strange in owls because a lot of them that live in a burrow, they leave the nest, also that breed an open stick nest, they leave the nest before they can actually fly.
Yeah.
So when do they really start flying? So we know for barn owls that stick into the nest until they can fly, then perhaps it seems that they are really short in learning how to fly, whereas in other species it may seem long, but they are climbing about in the branches a lot. So it's really difficult also to measure how much time it takes for a particular owlet to learn how to fly.
Yeah, and I think it's not per se based on the morphology of the wing. I think it's more based on the ecology of the species, or
yeah, and how far the breastbone is being developing before they leave the nest.
Did you use any sound analyzing equipment to assess the variations in ear feathers or face feathers?
The short answer is no. So this is only based on anatomy and a particular part of physics, and what other people also already have studied.
Exactly. No behavioral studies or whatsoever are included, because that would take an experiment to see how an owl responds to a certain sound or how physically the sounds are reflected or filtered. And like Arnold says, this is more like looking at the feathers, comparing between species and try to find out how these bases in morphology would make a difference.
But everybody is invited to try and
Yeah.
test this. And please come back to us with the results.
Somebody asked how they can send owl carcasses or raptor carcasses to you.
It depends on where the person is located. That's the most important question, because from the beginning of the project, we also kept in mind that if it's impossible to ship them, we can come there to do the dissection on location. So, of course, it takes some arrangements to do so, but if there's quite some carcasses waiting and they're really interesting, we would consider going there, doing the dissections, gather data, so we can include it in the data set. So,
yeah. And otherwise, there is some paperwork involved, and we have been successful in some occasions to get material over.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
well, that's something to negotiate.
Yes, but I would say if there are people interested in sharing carcasses or trying to help us in that direction, please contact us and we can see what we can do to make it work.
And I assume if it's in tropical locations, you would want to go to the specimens to dissect, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we also, that's one of the things, we're not looking at the dead owls per se. We still need living owls and owl behavior to link it to morphology. So especially when we go to the tropics to do owl dissections, it's just as important to try and get some idea of the behavior of the owls that is not per se written in books only, but also to get an idea of what the owls do, so we can explain part of the morphology. And that's hard because we're not used to those species. So that's a challenge for us.
And even in European species that are not owls, and we do not exactly know what they're doing, and you see strange adaptations or morphological structures, and you ask yourself, why would they use this? And you simply cannot find the YouTube video depicting what they're doing with that. So that maybe still be a puzzle sometimes, what they do with a particular anatomical feature. So if people know about these things, that is also very helpful.
All right, what ecological advantages do owls gain by seeing into UV?
Well, we saved this part for this owl special on the website, because we did it. You see how long the presentation got when we left UV out. So that's one of the reasons we left it out. But to see UV, it could be beneficial for owls to see other birds or animals that kind of reflect or absorb UV or don't see them. So basically,
to start with, you should say, I think, that where we think it is dark, if there's still UV light, the owl can see something. So it's not dark to the owl. That is the first thing. Yeah, and then you go on with.
But the question, I cannot answer the question completely. I guess if an owl can consider it not completely dark because there's still UV light entering the surroundings and it experiences sunlight, it could be beneficial, but only if what the owl can see is lit up by UV or reflect UV. So it also depends on what the owl is looking at and how that subject absorbs or reflects UV light. So I wouldn't be able to give one answer on why it's beneficial for owls to see in UV, but expanding the spectrum and seeing more than we can, that's part of the answer which might be beneficial, I think. But this is the case for more birds. So it could also be possible that that's just the range birds have, And it's known that birds look at each other differently because feathers reflect UV in a different way. So they get more cues from feathers than we do. So maybe even among owls, it's an important way of, let's say, recognizing individual owls or their partners or whatever. It could
or
be
the health of the owl.
Or yeah, for instance, but I wouldn't know it into detail.
Okay, let's jump down to feet. So why do most owls have feathered feet and the diurnal raptors don't?
It's a hard one, I think, because it can have several functions. Because we see in owls hunting Arctic areas, they have very feathered feet. For instance, great gray owl, snowy owl, their feet are completely feathered up to the bottom of their toes. But other owls have feathered feet and don't occur in really cold areas. So it could also be
and the feathering may be less as well.
Sorry?
They're not that densely feathered in other species than in snowy owl, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But there is variation among owls.
Yes, but it's not per se the Arctic conditions that explain that. So it's hard to say if it's hard to say why the feathered feet are present among owls. And I think in raptors, generally, they didn't have a function from the beginning. So the whole raptor group doesn't have feathered feet anymore. And in owls, maybe it's a trait that evolved and then differed among owls. But it's clear that among owls, it's still present, and in birds of prey, it's not. So I guess in some owls, it has a function. In some owls, it might not, but it's still present to a certain extent in the group. So I couldn't give a safe answer on ecological relevance of that. But I think in birds of prey, the relevance is not there, and that's why it's not present anymore. Or it hasn't been present at all when you see where the birds come from with the reptile feet, but then we go far, far back.
Does the high level of specialization in hunting morphology and behavior tend to restrict ability for owls to adapt to rapid global temperature changes? And is species extinction likely due to this? That was a complicated question.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
well, yeah. Of course, there will be some species more vulnerable to climate change than other species. And looking only at the European perspective, this is only a very small section of owls. But I don't think, by and large, that the level of specialization is the key issue there. I think the key issue is habitat and habitat loss due to climate change, and the habitat's changing so much that you alter the habitat completely, so you get another habitat. Especially for Nordic species, I can imagine that that will be happening.
Can wing loading be related to insectivorous feeding in the smaller owls?
Yes, it can be,
Yes.
but it's not that easy in functioning and cause-result relationship. Because if you are hunting in a small territory, you may want to expand the number of prey items that you can process, and you may more quickly include insect prey. Whereas where you have very good flight availabilities, and you can fly for longer distances, you can scout for the more beneficial prey at much lower costs. So these relationships are not very straightforward. So there may be a relationship, but what is causing relationship and what is the effect of relationship, that may also be completely turned around.
Hypothetically, how long can the owl be stored in a freezer and still be useful to you?
Long. No, it depends on how it's packed, but if it's packed in plastic, it can stay for years and still be suitable for dissection purposes. We have owls that are in the freezer for 10-15 years and we still have fresh organs and whatever inside. And a big difference with how we look at owls and other projects, I think, is that in much cases we don't take into account the exact masses we register, for instance, for an organ, but it's more like a relative comparison. So like we showed in the muscle size comparison, we don't weigh the muscle and say, that's the size of the muscle. We try to find a factor that is comparable, unrelated to condition or drying in the freezer over time, or so. Yeah, we can use specimens that are in the freezer for a long time. In general, yeah.
During the presentation, Cas, you mentioned that some owls have asymmetrical ears, about 8 species. What are those 8 species that have asymmetrical ears?
Did I mention 8 species? I can remember.
Which can you give some examples of the ones that do and the ones that don't have asymmetrical ears?
Yeah, it's hard to start with. It's hard to tell because you need some kind of a reference measurement to say if it's asymmetrical, and asymmetry can also be in the shape of the ear. So it's hard to compare groups within owls. But the boreal owl or Tengwalm's owl, that's really clear. The asymmetry is in the skull, like I showed in the picture. In barn owls, it's different. It's in the skin opening. So the skull is completely symmetrical and the skin is asymmetrical. And for instance, in long-eared and short-eared owls, the opening of the ear is of a different shape and therefore a different height. So there's several ways of having asymmetry in the ears. But for instance, eagle owls, they have less asymmetry. One ear opening is a bit higher than the other, but it's not as asymmetrical as in barn owls, for instance. So it's also, like we mentioned, the higher specialization, the higher specialized the species has, ears it has, the higher the degree of asymmetry seems to be. So in eagle owls, they don't have that highly specialized ears compared to a barn owl that results in less asymmetry visible to the eye.
And I know we're kind of at time now, but I want to throw out one other one because I'm curious too if you have any ideas. Does aging have any effect on hearing in owls, like in humans?
Yeah, if they get really old. I would expect that. I don't know this, but that is what logic would tell me. But I don't know in the wild whether they will get that kind of age.
Yeah, and I can imagine if they do and they lose the high-end frequencies, like in humans, then they tend to have sorry?
Then they're done for.
Yes, exactly. They have a problem hunting prey, I guess.
So somebody should go out and do hearing tests on owls in the wild when they start getting older.
Artificial
some of the
hearing.
banders out there's probably some sawwet banders watching, and there's so many people banding sawwets. When you get a recapture and you know how old it is, do a little hearing test on it.
Yeah. I'm curious about the cues you ask the owl to give in order to say, I hear you or I don't.
That would take some creativity.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us and going through so much information. It's going to take me a while to review my notes and process everything. And thank everybody who joined us to learn more about this, please tell others, refer them to the website and the social media links. I think those were put in both chats also, so people can copy and paste them from there if they didn't copy them from the presentation. Do check those out because they do post new stuff on there. I see the stuff on the Facebook page and I'm always drooling when you post something new on there. But it's exciting to see it happen. We're excited to have you come over here to the US and have you work on American specimens over here. So hopefully people that live in nicer climates than Minnesota also want you to come and visit and dissect specimens. So thank you everybody for joining us for the series. Thank you, Cas and Arnold, for this presentation today and giving your time. And we appreciate and staying up late because it's late over there. I think it's 10 o'clock at night.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's okay.
So thank you very much. And if you've missed any of these presentations, you can go to the Owl Center's website or our YouTube page and find lists of the saved presentations. Not all of them are saved, but a good chunk of them are. So you can go back and watch them at your leisure also. And we hope to do this again next winter. Please let me know if you have specific topics or presenters you'd like to see. And we'll see you again another time. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And have a good night, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Wel te rusten.